She had exactly one night to disappear from her own life. So she decided to die instead, just enough to be believed. Mira Voss lay perfectly still under the thin medical blanket, listening to her own heartbeat try to betray her. Tomorrow, every unmarried woman on the colony would stand in the selection hall while the Alpha King walked the line and chose his mate. Refusal was not a right anyone had. It was treason, written into the bloodline law the moment the colony rebuilt itself after the war that nearly erased it. A woman didn't say no to the king. She simply hoped he never looked her way. Mira wasn't willing to gamble on hope. She had spent 3 nights mixing a tonic from stolen infirmary supplies, something to slow her pulse, dull her color, and mimic the wasting fever that swept through the lower decks 2 winters ago. It burned going down. It burned worse staying down. But when the colony physician pressed 2 fingers to her wrist the next morning and frowned, Mira knew it had worked. Her name was struck from the selection list. Simple as that. A small, quiet rebellion no one would ever know about. Except someone did. The door to the medical bay opened that evening, and it wasn't the physician returning to check her fever. It wasn't a nurse, either. Mira knew at the moment the air in the room changed, colder, sharper, like the whole space had straightened its spine. Alpha King Kaelen Ashgrave stood in the doorway. He didn't come with guards. He didn't come with the formality of a ruler making an inspection. He walked in the way a man walks into a room he already knows the shape of, pulled the single metal chair beside her bed without asking, and sat down like he intended to stay a while. Mira kept her eyes half closed, breathing shallow, playing the part. Her mind raced faster than her pulse ever could. Does he know? Has someone already told him? If the king himself decided she'd lied her way out of the selection, there would be no quiet correction. There would be a public one. He didn't accuse her. He didn't even ask if she was well. He just watched her for a long moment, the kind of look that felt like it was reading something written under her skin, and said only 3 words. "I'll wait." He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't move to leave, either. He simply sat there in the low light of the medical bay, patient as stone, while Mira's fake fever suddenly felt very real, because now her heart actually was racing, and there was nothing convincing about it anymore. For the first time in her life, Mira understood what it meant to be truly caught between 2 fears. The fear of being exposed, and a stranger, unfamiliar fear she couldn't yet name, curling low in her chest every time the king's eyes moved back to hers. He came again the next evening, and the one after that. He never brought it up directly. Not the missing color in her cheeks that returned a little more each day, not the way her pulse, when he once reached out to check it himself under the guise of concern, beat far too strong for a woman who was supposedly wasting away. He noticed. Mira could see it in the small tilt of his mouth, the patience in his silence. But he said nothing. He let her keep her secret, even while quietly proving he already held the key to it. Instead, he talked about the colony, about the weight of a crown he never asked for, about a selection ceremony he seemed to despise as much as she did, though he wore the title of the man who would have to enforce it. "You don't want this either," Mira finally said on the 3rd night, too tired to keep pretending she couldn't speak clearly. "The selection, any of it." Kaelen didn't deny it. "I want a great many things the crown was never built to allow," he said quietly. "You're the first person in this colony who said it back to me instead of agreeing with whatever I say because I'm king." Something shifted between them in that sentence, small, dangerous, and impossible to take back. Mira wasn't just a girl faking a fever anymore. She was someone he chose to be honest with. And that honesty felt far more intimate than anything the selection hall could have arranged for either of them. But comfort in the colony never lasted long, without consequence finding its way in. Mira's room had one object she never let anyone see, a small folded note hidden beneath a loose floor panel, left behind by her mother before she died. Mira had read it so many times the creases had gone soft. It never said much, just enough to make her certain her mother hadn't died from illness the way the official colony record claimed. Just enough to make her believe someone in power had made sure the truth stayed buried with her. That night, unable to sleep, Mira pulled the note out again, tracing her mother's handwriting in the dark. A new line jumped out at her this time. one she swore she'd never noticed before, hidden in the corner where the ink had faded. A name, not a stranger's name. A name belonging to the king's own bloodline. Mira's hands went cold. If this was true, the man who had been sitting at her bedside every night, watching her with quiet patience and saying he would wait for her, his family might be the reason her mother was gone. She barely had time to process the thought before she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Familiar footsteps. Steady, unhurried, exactly like his. She shoved the note back beneath the floor panel just as the door opened. Kaelen stood there, but this time he wasn't smiling. This time, his eyes moved straight to the panel she'd just closed, lingering a half-second too long, as if he'd heard something shift or seen something he wasn't meant to. "Mira," he said, his voice lower than she'd heard it before. Not accusing, not gentle, either. Something in between, careful, like he was choosing every word before he let it out. "There's something you need to know. About your mother." The room went silent except for the sound of Mira's heartbeat. No longer faked, no longer hidden, pounding loud enough that she was certain he could hear it too. She had spent days lying to survive this election. But nothing she'd faked so far compared to the fear rising in her now. The fear that the man she was starting to trust might be the very person standing between her and the truth she'd spent her whole life trying to find. What does he know? And how far is he willing to go to make sure she never finds out the rest? The words hung in the air between them, like something neither of them could take back. Asterisk, there's something you need to know. About your mother. Asterisk. Mira didn't move. She didn't breathe. For years, she had built walls around that grief, careful and quiet, because grief left unguarded in this colony became a weakness someone else could use against you. And now the king, the one man whose bloodline might be tangled in her mother's death, was standing in her doorway, asking to tear those walls down himself. "Say it," she whispered. "Whatever it is, say it now." Kaelen closed the door behind him, and for the first time since he'd started visiting her, he looked less like a ruler and more like a man carrying something too heavy to set down alone. "I've known you were never sick," he said instead. "Since the first night." It wasn't the confession she was braced for, but it hit just as hard. Mira's mouth opened. Some denial half-formed on her tongue, but he shook his head before she could waste a breath. "Your pulse was too strong. Your color returned too fast. And no fever I've ever seen leaves a person's eyes that sharp." A faint, almost helpless smile touched his mouth. "You're a terrible liar, Mira Voss. You're just fortunate I had my own reasons not to expose you." "Why?" The question came out rougher than she meant it to. "Why let me get away with it?" "Because I didn't want the selection to happen either," Kaelen said. "Not for you. Not for anyone. I've hated that ceremony since before I understood what it cost the women forced into it. My father built it into law to control the colony after the war, bind bloodlines, secure loyalty, call it stability. I inherited a system I never agreed to. And you, lying in that bed, pretending to waste away rather than stand in that hall. You were the first person brave enough to refuse it, even quietly. I wasn't going to be the one who punished you for that." Something in Mira's chest loosened, dangerous and warm, the same feeling she'd been trying to talk herself out of for days. But she couldn't let it undo her. Not yet. Not with her mother's name sitting unspoken between them. "And my mother?" she pressed. "Say the rest." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "Your mother was chosen once. Years ago, before my father's rule hardened into what it is now." He hesitated, like the next words physically cost him something. "She tried to run from the selection, the same way you're trying to avoid it. Officially, the colony record says she died of illness a season later. Unofficially," he stopped. "Unofficially," Mira's voice cracked on the word. "Unofficially, I don't believe that record. I've spent 2 years quietly pulling at threads my father sealed shut long before I took the crown. I didn't know your name was connected until 3 nights ago, when I saw the date on your intake file and recognized it. That's the real reason I kept coming back, Mira. Not just because I admired the fire in a girl brave enough to fake her own illness in front of a king." His eyes held hers, steady, unflinching. "I came back because I think the truth about your mother and the truth I've been chasing about my father might be the same truth." And I didn't know how to tell you that without breaking something between us before it even had the chance to become real. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of grief, full of suspicion, full of something neither of them had given a name to yet, but both of them could feel taking root anyway. "I have a note," Mira admitted quietly, the words slipping out before caution could stop them. "From her. Hidden. There's a name in it I only just noticed tonight. It's connected to your family." Kaelen didn't flinch, didn't reach for it, didn't demand to see it the way a king with something to hide might have. He simply nodded, slow and grim, like he'd expected this moment to arrive eventually, and was almost relieved it finally had. "Then we look at it together," he said. "Whatever it says. I'd rather know the truth beside you than protect a lie built by a man who's already gone." They spent the following nights bent over old colony archives instead of pretending fevers and sitting through hollow visits. Records smuggled from restricted terminals, medical logs Kaelen accessed under the guise of royal review, fragments of a story neither of them could piece together alone. It should have felt like danger. Instead, it felt like the safest Mira had felt in years, working shoulder to shoulder with a man the entire colony feared, watching him grow more human with every file that made his father look less like a legend and more like exactly the kind of man who would silence a woman to protect the system. Somewhere in those long nights, something shifted that had nothing to do with the mystery at all. It was in the way Kaelen paused to make sure she'd eaten before they kept working. The way he noticed, without being told, when the weight of her mother's death became too much for one evening and quietly changed the subject to something lighter. Stories about the colony before the war, dreams he'd never told anyone because a king wasn't supposed to have dreams that didn't serve the crown. It was in the way Mira found herself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember, at some dry, half-serious joke he made about hating ceremonial robes more than he hated corrupt council meetings. One night, working late, their hands brushed reaching for the same data chip, and neither of them pulled away right away. Kaelen looked at her like the answer to a question far bigger than any archive could hold. "I told you I'd wait," he said softly. "I'm in it beyond a fever, Mira. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to trust me. With the truth. With this. With whatever this is becoming between us." Mira wanted to answer him. She wanted, more than she expected to let herself believe a king could be someone worth trusting completely. But before she could say a single word back, a sharp knock cut through the room. Too formal, too urgent to be anything good. Kaelen opened the door to find one of the council guards standing stiff and pale, a folded warrant already extended in his hand. Not for Kaelen, for her. "By order of Counselor Wren Calder," the guard said, eyes flicking nervously toward the king before settling on Mira. "Mira Voss is to be detained immediately on charges of manipulating royal favor through deception of health, a direct violation of selection succession law." Mira's stomach dropped. The fake illness. Somehow, someone had proof, real, undeniable proof, and it was standing in the doorway with a warrant that could end everything before the truth about her mother, or whatever was growing between her and the king, ever had the chance to matter. She looked at Kaelen, searching his face for the answer to the only question that mattered now. Would he stand beside her in front of the entire council and risk exposing his own father's crime to do it? Or would the crown he never wanted still choose itself over her, the moment it truly counted? The warrant sat in the guard's outstretched hand like a blade waiting to fall, and for one unbearable second, nobody in the room moved. Mira's eyes stayed locked on Kaelen, not pleading. She refused to plead, not after everything they'd uncovered together, not after nights spent bent over stolen archives instead of sleeping, not after the way his hand had lingered near hers like it belonged there. She simply waited, the same way he'd once waited for her, to see if the man beside her was real, or if the crown would swallow him whole the second it mattered. Kaelen took the warrant from the guard's hand, slowly, deliberately, and read it once. Then he folded it in half and set it down on the table beside the archive files, as if it weighed nothing at all. "This warrant is void," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the particular stillness of a man who had already decided something irreversible. "Effective now. and I'll make that clear to the full council myself. Tonight, the guard hesitated, clearly unprepared for a king to simply overrule his own counselor's order without hesitation. Your Majesty, Counselor Calder specifically. I heard what Counselor Calder specifically ordered, Kaelen said. Tell him I'll be addressing it in the hall within the hour. And tell him to bring every piece of evidence he thinks he has. I'll be bringing some of my own. When the guard left, Mira finally let herself breathe. But the relief didn't last long enough to feel safe. Kaelen, if you protect me publicly, Ren will use it. He'll say I manipulated you. He'll say you're compromised. Let him say it. Kaelen turned to face her fully, and something in his expression had hardened into resolve rather than fear. I've spent 2 years hiding what I found about my father because I was afraid of exactly what Ren will try tonight. Being called weak, being called compromised, losing the one thing that lets me actually change anything in this colony. But I'm done protecting a legacy built on silencing women like your mother. If standing beside you cost me the crown's approval, then it was never a crown worth keeping quietly. Mira reached for the folded note beneath the floor panel one last time before they left. The one piece of her mother's voice she'd carried in secret for years. Then let's not do this quietly either, she said. If we're doing it, we do it with the truth. All of it. The council hall had never felt so cold. Ren Calder stood at the center of the chamber when they arrived, flanked by 2 guards and a stack of falsified medical statements meant to prove Mira had orchestrated her illness deliberately to seduce her way into royal favor. He smiled the moment he saw them enter together, the smile of a man who believed he'd already won. Your Majesty, Ren said smoothly, addressing the gathered council more than Kaelen himself. I understand your fondness for the girl, but fondness cannot be allowed to undermine succession law. She lied. She manipulated the selection process. And now she's manipulated the king himself into shielding her from justice. A murmur rippled through the council. Mira felt every eye in the room measuring her, weighing her worth against the accusation, exactly the way the selection hall would have measured her worth against 100 other women if she'd never faked a single symptom. Kaelen stepped forward before the murmur could grow into judgment. You're right about one thing, Counselor. She lied about her illness. He let the admission land, watched Ren's satisfied smile widen, and then continued before it could settle. But you're wrong about everything else. And before this council decides her fate, it's going to hear the truth about why the selection exists at all and what my father did to keep that truth buried. He placed the hidden medical log on the table in front of the full council. The one they'd found together in the restricted archive. The one proving the old king had silenced a woman who tried to escape the very ceremony Ren was now trying to weaponize against Mira. The room went utterly silent as Kaelen read the record aloud. Every name, every falsified cause of death, every quiet act of cruelty dressed up as colony stability. Ren's composure finally cracked. This changes nothing about the law. It changes everything, Kaelen said, because the law was never about stability. It was about control, and it cost women their lives to maintain it. As king, I'm formally dissolving the mandatory selection process, effective immediately. No woman in this colony will be forced to stand in that hall again. Chaos broke out across the chamber. Council members arguing, Ren shouting something about instability, about bloodlines, about tradition. But Mira didn't wait for Kaelen to finish defending her. She stepped forward herself, the folded note from her mother finally unfolded in her own hands, and read it aloud to the entire council. Every word her mother had left behind, every quiet fear, every name she'd hidden for years out of terror alone. My mother didn't die of illness, Mira said, her voice steady despite everything trembling beneath it. She died because she tried to do exactly what I tried to do. Refuse a system that never asked for her consent in the first place. I'm not asking this council for mercy. I'm asking it to finally admit the truth it's been burying for a generation. The silence that followed wasn't chaos anymore. It was reckoning. By the time the council session ended, Ren Calder's case had collapsed entirely, buried under evidence he could no longer spin. The selection process was formally struck from colony law, a decision the council could not undo without exposing its own decades of complicity. It wasn't a war. It wasn't an empire falling. It was one broken system, finally dismantled by two people who refused to let it survive another generation. That night, Mira returned to the same medical bay where it had all begun. Not faking anything this time, just sitting quietly on the edge of the same bed, feeling the strange weight of a life no longer defined by fear of being chosen. Kaelen found her there, just like the first night, pulling the same metal chair beside her. But this time, there was no illness to hide, no lie between them, nothing left unsaid. "I believe I owe you something," he said softly. "You once told me I was fortunate to get away with pretending. I think, in truth, I'm the fortunate one." "For what?" Mira asked, though she already knew. "For a girl brave enough to fake her own death rather than surrender to a system neither of us believed in," he said. "For staying brave enough to face the truth instead, even when it terrified you. I told you once I'd wait for you, Mira. I meant it then. I mean it now for as long as you need. Not as a king choosing a bride, just as a man asking for a chance." Mira looked at him for a long moment. No fever to fake, no fear to hide behind, nothing standing between them anymore except the simple truth of what she wanted. "I'll wait," she said quietly, echoing the words that had once terrified her into stillness, now spoken freely, entirely her own. "But not because I have to, because I choose to." Outside the medical bay, deep beneath the palace archive 3 levels down, a colony technician quietly flagged one more file bearing her mother's case number. A file that, according to the records, should have been closed for years. It wasn't.